Welcome to a series within a series. Let me explain. I've been doing some videos about how I dial in espresso. My Patreon backers pick a coffee, pick a machine, pick a grinder, and I dial the coffee in and talk my way through the process. I've done 3 of these videos, and I've been grateful for a lot of feedback and comments. And one unifying theme has been that I'm not really doing enough to explain why I'm making a particular decision, why I'm adjusting something at that point. So I thought I'd do this. This is the first of 4 parts covering one variable at a time in a bit more depth, a bit more detail about how I think about that variable that should make a little bit more sense when we go back to dialing in a bunch of random different coffees from all over the world. This first episode is on dose, on the amount of coffee that you put in the portafilter, the amount of ground coffee that you start with. We'll also, in the future, talk about ratio, how much water you push through that coffee, grind size, when to go finer, when to go coarser, when to leave it alone, and brew temperature. We're not going to talk about time as a variable. Time is how we're going to track the changes to our variable. It's one of the 2 things that we measure when we're brewing espresso. Right? We're going to achieve a recipe, see how long it takes, and then most importantly, see how it tastes. That's the whole point of this whole thing anyway. That's what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk to you in a bit of depth about how I think about dose, setting the dose, why it matters, when to change it, and when to leave it alone. Now, in order to do this effectively, I need to cover briefly extraction theory. Right? The key idea behind what we're doing when we're brewing coffee is we're extracting soluble material from the ground coffee. The more of this we extract, the better, to a point. This is kind of a lopsided bell curve. Right? The more you extract, it gets better and better and better and better and better, and then it suddenly kind of falls off a cliff at one point and tastes pretty terrible again. We tend to talk about these as percentages because of the, let's say, 18 grams that you put in a basket, well, a percentage of that ground coffee is dissolved in the cup down below. If you wanted to, you could knock that puck out, dry it out in an oven and weigh it again, and you'd find out how much stuff was in the cup that you drank earlier, like the day before. We don't have to do that. That's just how it worked for a long time until refractometers happened, and then the world got easier and more complicated. That isn't the point. The point is that extraction, getting soluble material out and into the cup below, is work. To increase your extraction, you have to work harder. And that's really important when you're thinking about dose, because the more ground coffee that you start with, the more work you're going to have to do. To properly extract 18 grams requires 20% more work, in a way, than properly extracting 15 grams. That's something we need to bear in mind because a few things will influence, well, how much work we can do and how much work we should do. Generally speaking, the quality of our coffee equipment will determine how easy it is to do a lot of work. A better coffee grinder grinds more uniformly, it does a better job. It's easier to extract larger doses of coffee. It's easier to do more work with a better grinder. Similarly, higher quality espresso machines generally have better componentry, better quality, more evenness, better water dispersion, better water temperature. Just they're kind of better at doing the work. That's the subtext here. But machine aside, there's one more thing that we need to think about when we're deciding what dose to work with. It may seem like a detail, but actually the basket that you're working with, that metal basket that holds the coffee, well, that determines more than anything else the correct dose that you should be using. Many modern baskets now come with a dose reference on them, a rough kind of guide to how much coffee you should use. VST baskets, for instance, might come as a 19-gram basket, a 20-gram basket, and give or take 1 gram, that's probably what that basket should be using. And generally speaking, that is an upper limit. There isn't a low limit in terms of quality. It's perfectly okay to brew 14 grams of coffee in an 18-gram basket, but just know that the downside of that will be that it will be very messy. The size of the basket, the height of it, if you will, mean that if you use a much lower dose, there's a little bit of space between the top of the cake and the shower screen where the water came from. And at the end of the shot, when all of that pressure that you built up dissipates rapidly up through the group head that way, you tend to see a little explosion of a coffee puck. You'll get a soupy, messy, destroyed puck. It tells you nothing about what happened in the extraction. It's just very irritating to clean up. It's messy and I don't like it. I like to just knock out a clean puck and do the least amount of work possible when it comes to cleaning while still having good tasting espresso. So the basket is important. If you don't know, Google is your friend. If you've got an old school classic Italian espresso machine, probably start at 14 or 15 grams. They're really just not built for these much higher doses that people like. And while higher doses have certainly become popular, it doesn't mean that they're better. There's nothing better about brewing with a higher dose. That tradition of higher doses came from people manually filling baskets in order to get a consistent dose when grinding to order, when grinders weren't designed to grind to order. Now grinders are absolutely designed to grind to order, so we can use whatever dose we want, and there's no more messing around and doing the dosing on the basket with all of the nonsense. Then there is another important variable in all this, which is the coffee itself. Now, I'd love to say there's hard and fast rules, and I guess there's one or two. Generally speaking, the darker the roast of a coffee, the less work you need to do to extract it. The easier it is to get those solubles out. So it's generally okay to use a higher dose with a darker roast coffee. With a lighter roast coffee, you've got to work really hard to extract it. And that means if you start with a big dose, you've just got too much work to do. You've got an impossible amount of work to do. You're always going to have a sour, harsh, under-extracted, weak, thin-bodied sadness. And you don't want that. No one wants that. So I would recommend with lighter roasts, go for a lower dose. Your taste buds will thank you. The old rule of thumb for a long time was that density was the key, right? And that high density coffees grown at high elevation, washed coffees typically, well, they were harder to extract. It's a reasonable rule of thumb. Generally speaking, lower grown coffees are easier to extract than higher grown coffees, but it's not an absolute. Now we move into the all-important decision making, which is we've started dialing in our process. What should we do? And as much as possible, really, you want to keep your dose a constant. You start with what is quote unquote the right dose for your setup. You haven't gotten too ambitious with the amount of work that you're going to do, and you would keep it absolutely the same. And I would recommend doing that as much as possible. It's pretty much the last variable I will change, but there are certain situations where I'd recommend just tweaking the dose slightly. Now at home, you might have a grinder that when you adjust the grind setting, you need to grind through a little bit of coffee because it retains a bit of ground coffee that was the old grind setting, so to speak. So you've got to grind through 5, 10, sometimes 20 grams of coffee to get your new grind setting to come through. If you've got 250 grams of a coffee and you're dialed in and you're pretty close but not quite there, right? You pulled a shot, you put 18 in, you got 36 out in like 25 seconds, and it tasted nearly good. It was like okay, but needed a little tweak. But you haven't got much coffee left, it's precious, you're limited. I wouldn't change my grind, I wouldn't do that. I would just increase my dose 0.5 gram and use that extra coffee to help slow the flow through the cake. Obviously, the more ground coffee that you have, the more resistance that cake will provide, the harder it is for the water to get through, and the longer the contact time will be to get to your desired ratio. And in this case, it may push your shot from a 25-second shot to a 28, 29-second shot. And that small increase in contact time, you're going to keep your ratio the same, so you're going to brew a little bit more liquid through. That may just round the shot out. That may just take you to a place that is delicious with the least possible waste. Now, the opposite situation may be true. You might have pulled a shot that was maybe like 32 seconds. You didn't really love it. Well, you could, yes, reduce your dose a little bit. That shot will flow quicker. But bear in mind, by reducing your dose, you've given yourself a little bit less work to do. So the chances are you'll still do a pretty good job of extracting it, even at that slightly quicker flow rate. So small tweaks are okay as long as you're in the ballpark of good. But if you're a long way from good, I wouldn't touch the dose, keep it a constant, and go back again. Now, there's one more variable I want to talk about, but there's a couple of quick things. First, every video right now has a giveaway. If you are out of work, if you're laid off, if you're struggling and you need a bag of coffee, there's a link in the description down below. I'll send 10 bags anywhere in the world to the winners of those things on the condition that they can't afford coffee. If you can't afford coffee, please buy local, support great businesses. And I can do this because these videos have a sponsor, and in this case, the sponsor is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community full of thousands of classes for creative and curious people like you and me. Now, in the past, I've used Skillshare to up my technical skills around video making. Classes on there have helped me shoot better video, capture better sound, do a better job lighting myself. But I don't just use it for work-related stuff, I use it for my kind of passion projects too. I've been really getting back into photography. There's a fantastic class by Amy Vitale on documentary photography, capturing people and places. And hearing a National Geographic photographer talk about her process, seeing her work, is hugely valuable. And I love that in the same place, I can go and learn about lomography, get a little bit deeper into film photography that is truly obsessing me at the moment. As a premium member, for less than $10 a month on an annual subscription, you have unlimited access to every single class on there. And for the first 1,000 subscribers, the first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description down below, there's 2 free months of Skillshare Premium. Think of how much you could learn in the next couple of months. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The last thing that we need to talk about that is important to me that I don't really see discussed anywhere is caffeine. The more ground coffee you start with, the more caffeine is going to end up in the beverage that you drink. Caffeine is highly water soluble, so generally speaking, a bigger dose of ground coffee equals a bigger dose of caffeine. Now you, like me, probably really enjoy making espresso. So bear in mind that the more ground coffee that you dose in each shot that you drink, well, the less times in a day you should probably be making espresso. By pulling lower dose shots, you can pull more shots in a day and not over-caffeinate yourself. We used to mock the Italians for that kind of 14-gram double, that 7-gram single. How could you use just 7 grams of ground coffee? But on the upside, it means they get to drink a lot of coffee in the day, and that's pretty good. So do bear that in mind. Think a little bit about the impact of just how much coffee you're drinking on, how many shots you can pull in a day. But maybe you're not like me. Maybe you just like to use caffeine as like a big 2x4 to the head to get you going in the morning, and well, we've all been there. But if sometimes you want to pull a few more shots, really spend some time with a coffee, then drop that dose. Set yourself up to pull more shots. Have some fun. But I'd be interested to hear from you what I haven't talked about when it comes to dose. What have I missed? What else needs to be discussed? What else do you want to hear in the upcoming parts of this series? What do you want to make sure that I cover? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. But for now, I'm going to say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.